This is an ultimate global podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kora and George Mavros from Sydney.
So welcome again to another exciting series of episodes that we are covering here on personal growth and networking. When we talk about personal growth, one of the things that we should talk about is how we work and how working has changed over a period of time. But somehow a lot of organizations, a lot of people are still living 50 years before, or they're running way behind the times because they don't understand how the things have changed in the lives of people, what really makes them happy over a period of time, and how does it change with different generations. So we're going to talk all about that today. We have got a very, very special guest for today, Tim Duggan, who is the author of Work Backwards, which is a revolutionary method to work smarter and live better, as you can see on the left-hand side. But what is more fascinating about is how he has defined or how he has conceptualized the work-life balance and work in general, and how we kind of see work moving forward in the next 20 years, 30 years, which is quite phenomenal. So welcome to today's episode, Tim. Thank you so much for your taking your time with us today.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here, and I look forward to a good chat.
Great. So do you want to start off with describing a bit about what is this concept of work backwards? So when you talk about working backwards, what does that exactly mean in terms of anyone who is going to read it for the first time?
The concept of work backwards is actually really simple. It is a really simple concept that, like most simple things, though, took a lot of work and a lot of thinking in order to refine and get to the place where this idea is at. And it all started when I have been working myself for 25 years, ever since I was straight out of school. When I was 18, I went into the mailroom of an ad agency, and I worked really hard and worked really intensely and helped co-found a business and build the business and sold the business. And then it wasn't until I finally had a tiny bit of my first proper time off when I was in my 40s. And I started thinking about how we work, spending time looking at some of the research that is out there. And the more I researched it, the more space I had away from that treadmill that we just get on, where we go straight into work from school or university. Then work gives us money, and then we use that money to build the lifestyle that we want. I was very fortunate and very privileged to be able to take a bit of a break away from that traditional cycle and started thinking about, are we working in the right way? Are we really approaching all this in the right direction? And that led me to this really simple conclusion that we're actually doing everything the wrong way around. We are thinking about work and life and money and all these important topics in the wrong way. And so the very simple idea behind work backwards is we need to think of life first. So think of, who am I? Where do I want to be? What do I want to do? Then think of, what money do I need to get me there? And then, and only then, should we think about, well, how can I either find a job that fits in with that life I want, or what are the tools that I can use in order to refine the current work that I have in order to live a more fulfilling life? That's the really simple concept behind work backwards. Right.
And is there any specific kind of trigger that happened? You already described about all those things, but is it also influenced by your past books that you have written? Is it a continuation to that, or is it something completely new that you discovered after your father passed away?
Yes, this is the third book that I've written, and my first two books, Cult Status and Killer Thinking, are kind of two sides of the same coin in a way. They exist in a similar universe, but Work Backwards is a little bit different to those. And it was brought on, as you mentioned, by three things that happened. One of them to me only, and two that happened to everyone who's listening to this. Two of them happened to Can you hear me?
Oh.
I'm back. Can you hear me?
We lost you. We lost you in between. Now you're back.
Okay, great. So 3 things happened. The first thing was that after 15 years of building my own company with some of my colleagues and friends, I left that business. And that to me was a big jolt to my identity. I think that's probably familiar to a lot of people. We seem to wrap our identity and our work up together. So for me, the question was, who am I if I am not Tim from Junkie, which was the media company that I co-founded? So the identity part for me was a big, a big moment. The second thing that happened was COVID, and the shift that all of us felt during COVID in how it just reorientated how we think about work, how we think about life outside work. And the third thing that happened to me during this period was my dad passed away. My dad was probably the biggest influence on my life, and it made me reassess and rethink, am I on the right path? What are my values? What legacy do I want to leave? And you really think about these topics when you sit down to write the eulogy at your father's funeral. It really makes you think of your own life. And so all 3 of those things came together at the same time, and that led me to thinking about this big topic of how we work and how we live. So it's meaty. It is semi-controversial because the entire thesis of this book is that we need to work less. We need to deprioritize work from our lives. And that can be really confronting for some people to hear, because work for many people is so intertwined with identity and so intertwined with who we are that people really hold on to that. And I think that's a discussion that we should be having in our society.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant way to describe it. And even a lot of the time I'm having discussion with George as well. So George is my mentor. He guides me in different ways in my personal and professional life. A lot of the time, he also guides me about different things like participating more in charity or, doing all this kind of stuff. And even whenever I talk to George, he describes success as, it's not defined by how many houses or how many cars you have, but what kind of impact you have had on the society around you. So I want to bring George as well into this discussion and possibly ask you some questions on this concept of working backwards.
By all means, ask away.
What's your question?
Oh, sorry. I thought you were saying you wanted to ask me a question.
No.
So it's an interesting concept because taking your words literally, I don't necessarily agree with you, but taking the words that I think are the essence of the words and the theme of the words, I 100% agree with you. So I don't think we need to work less. What I think we need to do is we need to work with purpose. Now, if you work with purpose, and that means that you want to do 10 or 12 hours a day, and that's for charity, and that's for this, and that's for that, terrific. But if you think you have to work 10 or 12 hours a day for business, and that means you can't enjoy time with your partner, it means you can't support charity, it means you can't do traveling, then you need to work less. So what I'm saying to you, Tim, is I agree with you in what you're saying. The number of hours I work in a day doesn't bother me. It's what I'm doing in those hours. So my consulting practice is probably one of the smallest businesses in the region that I'm working in. I never have more than half a dozen clients, but whenever somebody needs help with the charity, or somebody needs to do this, or somebody needs to get that done, I've got the time to do it. The reason I've got the time to do it is because I'm not working 40 hours a week to pay for the new car, the new house, the new watch, the new widget, the new phone, the new computer, the new everything, so that all my friends know that I'm successful. That is, Sarab is 100% right. That is not success. My success are the Sarabs in this life, the Mahimas, the other people I've helped. So, but if I've got to work 6 hours to help him, that's not work. That's a joy. So I don't like when people talk about work-life balance. So Tim, I always say I talk about work-life integration, and it sounds to me like I found a cohort in you, because what you're talking is your version of work-life integration. And for the people listening to these podcasts, you've got two older people here saying it's not about the hours that I'm doing, it's about what I'm doing in those hours. And that's the important takeaway. That's the important takeaway to me. So I'm actually interested to hear a bit more about what Tim's got to tell us about his approach and his style.
Yeah, thanks, George. And I appreciate those comments. When I talk about the idea of working less, I'm talking about it on a general scale. So if you look at things like overwork, and you look at things like burnout, and you look at things like disengagement, all of these are going up over the past few decades. So on a general, and most of them are leading to burnout. Even look at during COVID, what happened is we think that when we work at home, we're going to kind of get all this amazing freedom. And there are amazing things that come from that, but we're also working a lot longer. And we're having, and part of that, you have less interaction with other people. So it's a different type of work. So when I say work less, individually, everyone can decide how many hours they want to work. But as a society, we're generally working too much. However, what you said around purpose is exactly it, George, because what I talk about is that in order to figure out where you want to go, in order to work backwards, you need to have a map. You can't have a map without knowing where you're going. And a map stands for the three things that you need, which is you need to know what meaning you get from work and outside it. You need to know what your anchors are, which is your core values that make you, that get you up in the morning. And you need to know what your priorities are. So what are you working for? What are you trying to do with the life that you're living, which comes down to impact? And purpose sits in with all those. Meaning is part of purpose. Priorities is part of purpose. And if you can figure out what your own map is, where you want to get to, all of a sudden, all those other questions become so much easier. So how you can use some of those tools that we now have available to us, and not tools. And so tools are things like 4-day work weeks, things like career breaks, things like hybrid working, remote working. All these things are tools. So they're not just things to be used. They're tools to be used in order to give you back time to spend time doing what you love. Or if you get a lot of purpose from your job, amazing, congratulations. You should be using those tools in order to ensure that you can continue getting purpose and meaning from your job. So it's a really personal thing. I think sometimes when we talk about the future of work, it's easy to kind of think that everyone's future is going to be relatively homogenous, whereas everyone's future of work is completely unique. And my future of work is different to both of yours. And what I find fulfilling and what I want out of my life is very different to what you want. But my entire message with this book is you should try and figure out yourself what you want, and then you can figure out and make a personalized plan of how you can get there.
Yeah. And I think what happens is that I have to work 40 hours a week, and I have to work traveling all over the world, and I have to do this and I have to do that. And when you ask most people why, well, I've got a mortgage for a brand new, and I've got a mortgage for this, and I've got this, and I have to have this, you know, the car has to be, and all of that. And people get carried away with, you really only need a roof over your head and 4 walls to keep the weather out. How much further up than that you don't have to have, you choose to have. And so there's a number of people that I've worked with over the years that tell me that they need to increase their salary by 40 or 50%. And I say to them, here's a novel idea. Why don't you just reduce your outgoings? For me, I don't have a lot of outgoings. Therefore, I don't need a lot of hours to work. Therefore, I have more hours to do charity. Therefore, I have more hours to do this. And so I fully agree with you. I'm actually, people think that I read books left, right, and centre, and I don't. I'm not a reader. So I'm hoping that yours comes out in an audio version, or I will make sure that will be a book that I will read, because there's a lot of synergy in what you're saying to what I believe. And I'll certainly take MAP and I will credit you for it, and that'll come into part of what I'm talking to people about. So yeah, it's
that was great. Thanks.
Where you start is so critically important. And when people get involved in business first, and then they try to jam life into it, and what Tim's talking about is, here's something novel. Why don't you start with life first, and don't jam work into it? Get it to fill in somewhere. So
that's 100% it, George. And my book is currently on Audible, narrated by me, my dulcet tones, and also audiobooks.com and anywhere you get your audiobooks from. The second step, it's a really simple 3-step process they have. And the second step is called Know Your Enough, as in, so know what enough is for you. And that is exactly what you are talking about, which is, we don't need more stuff. We have enough. And unless we break away from what society tells us, what our neighbors tell us, what our parents tell us, what people who are either generally well-intentioned or people who do not think about, do I need a bigger house? Do I need another new car? Do I need this or that? The answer generally is, once you know what enough is for you, once you've defined what that is, that could be your house, it could be somewhere you rent, it could be where you are with your partner, it could be putting food on the table, whatever it is. Once you know what enough is, you can then work backwards. And George, it sounds like you live the philosophy of work backwards without having read this book. So you and I could have co-authored some of this book together. But this simple idea is, do all that first, figure out how much money you need, then figure out how work fits into that. And the change that can make in your life can be so, so, so freeing. And I think that that's what people are realizing and discovering. And I traveled the world and spoke to 50 or 60 people who are all living and thinking like this. And it was a real eye-opening process for me over the past couple of years.
Many, many years ago, probably about 25 years or so more, I was looking to have a bit of a break. So rather than work in my own business, I was just going to go and work for somebody for a while. And I was applying for some jobs. And I was talking to a young recruiter in the city. And so he said, "Oh, what sort of salary are you looking for?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking for 120,000 a year," which was 25 years ago. I said, "But if it's based in the city, then you can add $15,000 to $20,000 to that." And he said to me, "Well, that's a bit ridiculous." And I said, "Do you think so?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Why do you think it's ridiculous?" He said, "Why do you think you're worth $15,000 or $20,000 more based on where your office is?" I said, "Because it's going to take up more of my life driving in and driving out of the office." Anyway, an office which is 15 minutes from where I live, and I've managed to get a $10,000 pay increase. Thank you so much for setting me right.
I love that. But as soon as I think that's a wonderful story, George. I think as soon as you realize that time is the real resource that we should be optimizing for here, because that is the scarce resource, and that's something that puts everyone on an equal level. It's we all have a similar amount of time here on Earth. And COVID was a really great, it sounds like your story was kind of like a precursor to what would happen then many years later during COVID, when we were told that all of these rules that were immutable and unmovable, you had to go into an office 5 days a week. You had to spend an hour commuting each way. All of a sudden we realized that we can do this. I'm currently sitting here in Mallorca. You're in Australia. I'm still working on Australian time whilst over here. And all of a sudden, things like commute time and where you are in an office and who you work with all got thrown out and reshuffled at the same time. Yep. And I think we realized that anything that we can do to maximize the amount of time that we have for ourselves, as well as when we're at work, can we take those 2 hours that we would have spent commuting and either give them to something that we want to do outside work or spend them on something else at work that's going to be more focused. That's a really important lesson I think we all learned over the last couple of years. And George, it sounds like you just learned that lesson many years earlier.
Many years earlier.
Yeah.
So how does somebody put into practice what is so easy for you? How do they actually? Oh, well, geez, this sounds like a good idea, but how the heck do I do it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it sounds easy for me, but it's taken me years to get to this point. It's took me 10 years of figuring out how I could angle my life in a way that was beneficial for me, because I'd spent the whole time working the other way around, where you go work first, then money, then life. So the first step is you need a map, which is you figure out what your meaning at work and outside work is. I think sometimes when we talk about meaning and purpose, we think about it from a work lens, whereas it's really important to know what meaning you get outside of work. So the map, the meaning, your anchors, and your priorities. The second step is then knowing what enough is for you. So figuring out what enough is for you. I've got a really simple process that I call a backwards budget, which is there's a template you can download, an Excel template, and you put it in to figure out how much does it cost me to live the life that I want to live. Once you know what that is, it's really freeing, because you might see it going to cost me $100,000 to live the life I want to live. Then all of a sudden, when you are offered a job and you get offered a $150,000 job, you can say, well, maybe I only want to work 3 or 4 days a week, get that money in and spend the rest of those 1 or 2 days doing something that's important to me. The third step, and this is the really practical side, is then how can you use the right tools for you? So in the book, I go through 8 or 9 of what those tools are. So things like 4-day work weeks, remote working, flexible working, hybrid working, career breaks, taking time off, all of these things. All of these are tools to be used. And the simplest way that I think about this is that you should treat them all as experiments. So none of them are going to be perfect, but try, if you work for somebody and you think your boss is not going to listen to this, go to them and say, can we do an experiment for a period of time? This is what I want to test. These are the 5 things I want to test. And let's do it for 1 month, 2 months, 1 week, 3 months, whatever it is. Let's test it and see if it works. Most bosses would probably agree to that if you said you want to do it as an experiment and you said, these are the things I want to test. And then treat it like an actual experiment. So what do you want to test? Output, happiness at work, satisfaction. Are people going to stay longer? In the book, I run through a bunch of tests that I did around 4-day work weeks with a bunch of companies and the things that I tested as we did that. And out of the companies that, for example, do 4-day work week experiments, something like 93% of them never go back. So they realize that all of the benefits outweigh the negatives in that. So I think just treat everything as an experiment. And if it's working for you now, amazing, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you again in 6 months' time.
So just on that money side of things, I want to point out to people watching this, I'm on the 5th of November this year, I will be 21 with 48 years experience. So I am not worth $1 million in Australia. I am not worth $1 million. Okay. I was offered a proposition from somebody And if I went and did what he wanted me to do with him, and I do want to work with him, he projected that I would earn $1 million in 1 year. And I said to him, gee, that's a shame, because that won't happen. And he said, no, he said, you've got the wrong attitude. I said, no, I haven't. I said, I've got the right attitude. I will not do what you need me to do to earn that $1 million. So then he said, well, what if we did this, 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 and this, and you can earn $500,000? And I said, I won't do that either. I said, this is what I'll do. I'll do this, I'll do this, I'll do this. And he said, well, you're only going to earn $250,000 a year. And I said, I'm comfortable with that. Now he gets a percentage of what I get. I said, if you're comfortable with that, we can go ahead. If not, it's okay. The point I'm trying to make to people, most people at my age are desperate to get the quid because I'm going to retire and blah, blah, blah. I've got too much other stuff to do. I don't need it. Would I like it? Would be great. I'd have more money to give to charity. But I'm not going to let go of what I'm doing. And this is what Tim's trying to explain to you. What he's trying to get you to do is not be dependent on the dollar at the beginning. Be dependent on enjoying your life and then work the dollars into it.
Yeah.
This is not a program that only rich people can do. I don't want people thinking, oh, Tim's much older and George is much older. They can afford to. No. This is a way of life, and work is only a portion of your life.
Yeah. And I think the different
Oh,
generations.
hello, Sarab. Nice of you to join us.
Of course, I'm also here. So what I was saying is, you should give room to different generations. So, our Gen Z is trying to now enter into this discussion. It's not only a discussion between baby boomers and millennials. So what we are trying to do is also talk about the generational part of it, Tim, because I guess we had some discussion when you were at Work Club, and we were talking about that Gen Z are by default a lazy generation, or some people term them like that, but a lot of them are pretty smart in what they want to do, what they want to achieve. How do you see that this generational aspect coming into working backwards? Do you see that Gen Z understand this concept better than baby boomers, or they're even worse in that aspect?
The generational stuff is fascinating. And this is someone who I consider myself the world's oldest living millennial, because I was at the very start of that, and I will always hold on to that. And I spent a lot of my career, Junkie Media was a publisher for millennials, back when we were just called young people, though. And then we eventually became the generation that was called millennial. The generational differences are really fascinating. And when I was doing a lot of research for this book, I became pretty dismayed, because all of the statistics around overwork and burnout and things that I talked about just were going in one direction. And the next generation coming into the workforce, which is Gen Z, which is roughly 16 to mid to late 20s now, they have parents who are either millennials or Gen Xers, or they have older brothers and sisters, and they have seen what a lot of the impacts, the negative impacts that work has had on that older generation. So they've seen burnout go out. They've seen disengagement go up. And Gen Z have a different relationship with work. They, I think, have a really good relationship, a healthier relationship with work, which is not the center of their lives. And I think it's easy to look down at that generation and call them lazy, entitled, narcissistic, not hardworking, all those things, when in fact they're generally looking at work and saying, I don't want what my parents had or what my brothers and sisters had, where I can see it's led to burnout and led to all these negative things. So whether that goes too far in one direction remains to be seen, but I think it's a healthier way of looking at work. At the other end of the scale are Gen X and baby boomers. And one thing that George mentioned, which I think is something that I agree with and love challenging in the book, is this idea of we tend to think of work or our lives as having three stages. We have learn at the start, which is where you go to school and university. We then have earn, which is a 40-year period in the middle. And then we have burn, which is now about a 30 or 40-year period at the other end. And we tend to think of it in 3 stages. We learn, we earn, and we burn. And instead, the better way of thinking of it, which I know George is thinking about it and many people are, is mixing all those stages up together and having learn, earn, and burn throughout your life. So figuring out different ways of how can we keep the learning going? Why do we need to retire at 65 and all of that amazing experience and energy and wisdom just goes to a golf course and stays there for the next 30 or 40 years? That is not the way that I think we can best as a society use all of this knowledge and wisdom that we build up. So there's some examples in the book of people I speak to. I spoke to one historian who is nearing 80 in the book and saying it's his most productive period yet. He sits there and he never wants to retire or think about retiring because he enjoys it so much and it keeps him alive and it keeps him connected. And I know that myself, I'm in this stage now where I'm combining learning, earning, and burning. I'm going to Spanish classes most days to learn. I'm living in Mallorca where I'm certainly burning through a lot over here, but I'm also earning because I'm doing a lot of really interesting projects and writing books. And I'm doing all of that at the same time. And I think it's a really wonderful way to combine it. And I'm 43 now, and I think I'm going to continue doing this until I'm 93. That's what I want to do.
21 with 22 years experience.
Thank you, George. I'm going to use that phrase on. I'm 21 with 22 years experience. I love that.
And one of the things, Tim, thanks for pointing that out for the different generations. One of the things that you talked about was engagement. So engagement is getting a big thing in organizations, right? Every day people come to work, as you said, they feel disengaged with work, maybe because their work doesn't prioritize them, or their workplace hasn't done enough to understand what the employee is looking for. And that's the reason why they feel disengaged at work. So what do you think organizations can start doing from their end? Like you pointed out some methods like starting off with a 4-day work week or hybrid work. If you're an organization, if you're provided with these tools, what's the right way of looking at it? Because some organizations can just say, oh, I don't think so, that's going to work with our organization. Even without trying it out, they'll just come to a conclusion when you start talking to them. What should be the approach for organizations to kind of say that, these are the tools we want to have a good trial on, and that's how we'll figure it out over a period of time if it's working or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that the solution to all of this is going to be solutions that are co-created by both the workplaces and the workers themselves. This idea that you have workers wanting something, and then you have from the top employers wanting something else, that's just going to be a recipe for disaster. So if you are in a workplace at the moment, the best thing you can do is to have a conversation. Just make sure that you open up a conversation about what are you trying to solve for, because every workplace is different. And then within workplaces, there's also not one size solution. So if you have a large organization and you have someone who works in manufacturing, someone who works in sales, someone who works in finance, one solution like a 4-day work week might not work across the organization. So sometimes you need to have different tools in different areas. But the only way you can solve that is by having a conversation with your staff. If you're an employee, asking your boss to have a conversation with you around what are you trying to solve for? What do you want? That's the P in priorities. So figuring out what the priority is for you. Are you trying to solve so that everyone can leave in the office at 5 o'clock every day in order to go home to their family? Are you trying to solve so that people don't burn out because you have a quite intense workplace, and generally people burn out after 2 to 3 years? If you're trying to do that, the solution might be that you have a long service leave program that every 3 years you get a month or 2 off in order to recharge. There's really lots of different solutions and ways that you can cut it. And I think every organization needs to figure out what are you trying to solve for within your uniqueness of your own company.
So, Sarab, back back in my 30s, yes, I can still remember back then. I was managing director of a distribution company. And I had two storemen who were in their 20s, and they lived down on the coast, down Manly, DY, on the beaches area. And so we had an arrangement. When we used to pack orders there, Tim, one person would pick the order, another person would pack and check the order. That way we cut out mistakes, because you picked it, I check it. So you'd pick, I'd pack. I'd pack. If I picked, you packed.
Yeah.
So we had 4 storemen plus a warehouse manager in those days. So they would ring me on Friday or Saturday night and say, can we go and work on Sunday? Not a problem. So they would go in on Sunday. They did not get paid overtime. They didn't get overtime rates or penalty rates or anything like that. They went in whatever time they wanted to do. Could be midnight. I didn't care less. And they would pick their 8-hour shift of orders. And on Monday, because they both used to study all the charts, on Monday they used to go out surfing. So, but when you guys and I came in on Monday, we packed all the orders that they had to do. I had 2 invoice ladies, and I said, so long as this place runs, I don't care. So one of the ladies, we had enough work in those days. We had 2 ladies just building out invoices. This is in the day of the old dot matrix printer, by the way. So Robin would come in on the weekend, and she would do 4 hours worth of, we had a 2-step process. She'd do 4 hours of part A. Then she would come in at 1 o'clock on Monday. It didn't matter. All of her part A's could be done, and the other girl could do the part B's. And when Robin came in, they both went back onto things. Now, as I said, that was back when I was 31, 32. And I still have people here telling me today, you can't do it. It's too hard to organise. The day I left that company over morals and ethics issues, the staff asked for a pay rise, because they said, we used to work with George Mavros. We now work for the new management.
Yeah. What a great example, George, of using flexible work to solve for something. And in that case, the meaning that people get, so some people that came in on Sundays, the meaning they got outside work was surfing and hanging out with their mates and being in the water. Yeah. And I imagine that some other people, the meaning that they would have got is spending time with their family and getting their kids to school and doing that. And when you go to priorities, when you think of what your priorities are, work should be one of them, but also your mind, your body, and relationships. And if you can make sure that going surfing every Monday is important for your mind and your body, then you make work for you in a flexible way. I think that's a really great example of you were doing it many years ago, and people can still take those tools now. And it's not just flexible working for the sake of it. It's not just coming in on a Sunday so that you can just take a Monday off or be lazy or not do anything or whatever it is. It's doing things for a reason and making work actually work for you. And that's what the entire thrust of the book is about.
You've got that special concert on, and there's no way you can finish work and get to the concert. There's no way you can go to the concert and be back at work in time. Then just work with them.
Yep.
Just work with them. You know?
Yeah.
And the secret recipe of all of that, I didn't own the business. I owned it with 32 staff. They all thought it was theirs because they had that flexibility, and that was it. When I left, I took 10 or 11 with me, and the remainder said we either get a pay rise or we're out of here. So, and that happened within 4 weeks.
How interesting.
The new management took all the keys away from them. Every member of my staff had a key to the had a key to the office. They all had their own passwords. Why would I want to stop you going in and working? And for them, because I said, I'm not paying you overtime. I'm exchanging an hour for an hour, 2 hours for 2 hours.
Well, I guess gone are the days when employers just used to ask you to come to the office for work. But I guess now, if you are not putting in those things like flexibility, adaptability in your job application, even the employees don't want to talk to you. Because I see this as a very common trend with some of my friends and people who have recently graduated out of uni. If you talk to any of them, most of them are looking for more flexibility, hybrid work environment. Things like that are not there in the job application. People might not even apply for those kind of jobs. So I feel that trends have changed since the time you were working, George, in the industry, and now I guess people are demanding for those things, because if you don't have, they're like, we can't work at your place. So
they are, yeah, they're becoming non-negotiables, and I think that is wonderful. People are realizing, I want to pick the kids up from school every day at 3:00. So the job that I want to find needs to be flexible, because I can get back online then at 8:00 once the kid goes to bed. I can get back online for 2 or 3 hours and finish that work off. But if you don't have that flexibility, I find an employer that does. Yeah. And that is amazing, because we're finally matching employees with employers, because many employers are offering these flexible ways of working and hybrid working, 4-day work weeks, and all these things. So it's a positive.
A client of mine that's IT, and every single client he takes on, he explains to them he stops at 2:30, and he's not back until 7:30 or 8:00 at night. And at 2:30, he goes and picks up the kids from school, and then he helps with. They've got a young child, and he helps with the young child. And he gets them organised for dinner, and he does all of that, and he's back. Now, if you have a computer crash or something like that, he has a backup system for you. But if you want to talk to him, if you want to send him emails and all of that, he's not there from 2:30 sharp, and that's a wonderful thing. Think of going and telling that to IBM 20 years ago, that they would have passed out.
George, I even think back through 5 years ago. Think to 2019. If you said to your boss, I want to work from home next week, they would have thought you were skiving off. They would have, really kind of like thought twice, or it was a code language for like, oh yeah, you're going to go and get lots of work done. Whereas now you work from home and you do it because you want to do deeper thinking, or you don't want to be in calls or distracted all the time. You can then come back into the office the next day, and the answer is hybrid workplaces. It's not 100% of either of them. And that is just so freeing as to the options we have available to us now.
And there's one point I want to make, because there's some people that will be listening to this that are the negative Nancys of the world. Nothing against Nancy. We understand if it's brain surgery, we can't say, oh, we'll just put that back for 2 days. Or if it's the guy that drives the train, oh, well, the train's not coming at 10:00 because Tim's having a day at the beach. We're not talking about every single opportunity allows it, but there's many, many, many an opportunity that it can be done on that basis.
It's very true, George. I also think, though, that even with, so we're talking a lot about professional and white collar workers here, but even with tradespeople and other traditional blue collar workforces, there is still parts of the job that can be done from other locations. So it's estimated that about 25% of a nurse's job generally can be done from another location. So that could be paperwork, it could be scheduling, it could be research, it could be reading other things. So there are some jobs even that we think of as being location specific, where if you think about it, you might still be able to take an hour or two a day or a day a week in another location. And that's obviously, there's a train driver can't necessarily do that. But even with jobs that you think are tied to location, there's always ways of being more flexible. And location is just one of those ways. The other thing is more intense break time, career breaks at more regular intervals, taking time out. All these things can be done regardless of what work you do.
Yeah. So, Saurabh, I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
I'm
often not in that seat of answering a question. I'm just asking questions. I'm very privileged that you're asking me a question.
So you've been sitting there and you're listening to this, and Tim and I have more years of experience at 21 than you do. Where is this sitting with you? What's it making you think about? You've had time already to start to think about your career in that. What thoughts does it raise for you that you would share with people of your generation?
I think it's a very interesting concept of working backwards. I've not read the complete book. Let me just admit that. I've just read 1/3 of the book, which is the first 100 pages. But the concept of working backwards definitely synergizes with me and a lot of my friends that I talk to, because I think this generation, as Tim pointed out, is always looking for an employer which can provide more flexibility and which can adjust with their routines. Like, we've got people in our company where I work at, and people have different routines. Some people prefer to work 5 days from home because they want to go out for a surf, or they want to go for an afternoon run. So, coming to office doesn't really suit them. For me, I prefer to work from the office because it suits me, because I have a podcast. I need to run a podcast. I love meeting people in the city. So I just told my manager, I said, I would need an office space because I love networking with people. I love meeting people in the city. So I'm fortunate that I work in a company which kind of understands that. And a lot of companies out there, I guess, are now understanding that. And those who aren't are not able to retain the employees for a long period, because what I'm seeing is, if you're not able to respect your employees, the employees will take out the frustration somewhere. When they'll meet you for an after work beer, they're like, this employer isn't good. I'm going to leave this employer in 2 months' time. So what they're doing is they're just putting in their bare minimum effort to just get through this time with the current employer, so that they can find a better employer which can provide them with more flexibility. And a lot of stress and burned out situation is because of the fact that employers kind of don't respect the employees, and they don't give them enough freedom and flexibility to do the things that they really want to do. That's what I feel, George.
Cool.
I'm very mindful of the time today, Tim, because we've already crossed 15 minutes, I guess, but we never noticed it because the discussion was so engaging. So in order to wrap up today's episode, do you want to highlight any top two or three takeaways from the book, which of course people would love to read the whole one, but any 3 takeaways that you want to give from the book?
The 3 takeaways are essentially the 3 steps on how to work backwards. The very first step is you need to create a map, which is you need to know what meaning you get from work and outside it, what your anchors are, which are your core values, and what your priorities are. If you get a map first, that's the most important thing. The second thing is to know what enough is for you. So to really interrogate and think around how much money you need, how many cars do you need, like think through that so that you're consciously making a decision rather than just mindlessly consuming without thinking. And the third one is then really look at all the tools we have available to us. The reason why this book is so important right now is we have more tools than we have ever had in our workplaces, and experiment them and figure out which ones work with you in order to help you solve for what you wanted at the start. So for where you wanted to go and where you wanted to get to. And that to me is my top 3 takeouts.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So my take on what I've learned so far from Tim is, if you imagine your entire life as a wardrobe, and you decide at the beginning that you want to have a whole lot of shirts in the wardrobe, and you prefer to have blue shirts, but because things start one way or another, you end up grabbing a white shirt, grabbing a yellow shirt, grabbing a red shirt, grabbing another white shirt. Because you've done that, you then have to keep grabbing all these shirts. And then later on, you don't actually have any room to put the blue shirts in that you wanted. Whereas if you start from the end and you say, I want blue shirts, and you get offered a white shirt, you might use it for the time being, but you don't fill the wardrobe. So think of your life as a wardrobe. What do you want it to look like at the end? That's what you start filling it with.
I'm not too
George,
sure about shirts, but I definitely need more jackets.
I reckon you need to write a book, George.
Sorry, say that again.
I was saying to George that I definitely don't need shirts in winters. I need more jackets now.
And I was going to say, George, that you should write a book, Wardrobe Backwards.
We might do that one day.
But I like the analogy. I think you need to know what you want first. Because if you don't, society is going to tell you what you think you want. And every kind person with meaning around you will tell you what you think you should want. And one day you're going to wake up and you could be 21 plus however many years you have, and you might realize that you don't want this, or you're not happy, or you fulfilled someone else's dream. And that to me is, I think, one of the biggest potential sadnesses in life, if you've lived out someone else's dream instead of your own. So I really implore everyone just to stop and think about what you want that's personal to you only, and then go after it. And hopefully all these things that we talked about today can be of some service to that.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you so much for taking our time. I appreciate that. And I hope that this episode at least starts a discussion in workplaces amongst workers on how to work in a smarter way and how to live their life happily after this episode and after reading your book. So I'll put the link of the book in the comments section on LinkedIn as well as on our podcast channel. So you should definitely go and read that. Thank you so much, Tim. Hope to see you very soon in one of the other books that you're going to write very soon.
Amazing. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the chat, both of you.
Thoroughly enjoyed being with you today, Tim.
This is an Ultimate Global Podcast. Hello, and welcome to our special weekly podcast on trending international and social affairs. You're listening to Saurabh Kaura and George Mavros from Sydney.